Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Okay, now usually when I do homeschooling videos, I'm sharing tips or ways to simplify your homeschool or just ideas for beginners. Today's video I'm going to take from a different angle, and I'm going to share with you 10 ways to sabotage your homeschool. Have you ever noticed that we parents tend to be bent on being destructive towards areas of our lives that we want to succeed in the worst way? And a lot of times that can be in our homeschools. And this is something I have personally experienced throughout our homeschooling journey, that there are certain things that I have been insistent upon doing that have inevitably almost led to the sabotage of our homeschool. And I'm going to share 10 of those things today in the hopes that maybe you would recognize these things that you might be doing and figure out that there might be a better way. So the first way to sabotage your homeschool is to replicate what you did in school. Sure, this might work for some kids, but let's be honest and say that it is not going to work for most children. And I think that it is, an instinct of parents to remember what they did when they were in school, because you do what you know, right? But that's not always the right thing to do, especially when it comes to replicating school. Because I think that we've realized now is that the school way isn't the best way. If that were the case, so many people wouldn't be homeschooling. So I want you to take a step back and realize that just because school does things a certain way doesn't mean that you have to. So the second thing that could sabotage your homeschool would be for you to rely on arbitrary milestone and timeline charts for your children. I've done a video on these things a few times. I remember a couple years ago, I was referring specifically to a series of books that tells you like what your kindergartner needs to know, what your first grader needs to know, what your second grader needs to know, and so on. And while those books can be good, they can give you a good foundation, and they can give you good ideas on things that you can be doing with your children of those ages. I think that it is far too easy to kind of fall back on them and treat them almost as Bibles, as if you cannot deviate from those milestones or those timeline charts at all. And as a parent, and as a homeschooling parent especially, what you are hopefully going to notice sooner rather than later is that kids don't all come from the same mold. They don't all develop on the same timeline, and that is okay. That is how God created them to be. We need to stop pushing our kids to do things they are not developmentally ready for. Even when it comes to children within your own family. Your oldest child may have learned to read by the time that they were 4. But if your second or third child isn't reading by the time that they're 6 or 7, you can't compare the two of them. They are different children. They have different strengths and different weaknesses. And I think it's helpful to recognize that and to treat each individual child for their own uniqueness. So a third way that you can really sabotage your homeschool is to listen to the naysayers. How many of us have had family members or neighbors or friends, or sometimes even complete strangers telling us what a bad idea it is to homeschool and how you couldn't possibly be qualified to educate your own children, or your children are going to be socially awkward and they're not going to know how to get by in the real world, or they're not going to know how to have a job one day if they don't ever have someone else telling them what to do. I think that most homeschooling parents have heard some variation of these talking points that a lot of people have, but I'm telling you, don't listen to them. The people who are saying these things to you, they don't know your child. They likely have never looked into homeschooling or have never even known another homeschooling family, at least not more than one, and not one up close. And so if you take the things to heart that these people are saying to you, and I know that it can be hard to avoid it, especially if it's family members. I've heard so many instances of parents or in-laws who are the worst culprits of this. So again, I know how hard it can be to ignore it, but I want you to remember that if if you take the things to heart that they are saying out of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance in a mean way. I mean ignorance because they honestly don't understand that there's a better way. If you start to believe the things that they're saying, you are going to lack the confidence that you need to educate your children. And yes, it is going to affect your homeschool, and you are going to be more likely to start doing things that the schools do just to please those people in your life who think that you're not doing it the right way. Don't listen to the naysayers. I want you to just listen to yourself, listen to the Lord, listen to your children, and kind of push what everyone else has to say out the door. So the fourth way that you can sabotage your homeschool is to refuse to look beyond textbooks. And this kind of goes back with, replicating school. There are so many other ways for children to learn beyond textbooks. Textbooks are I won't say good, but I'll say better in the school situation, because there are so many children who are learning at the same time, and they are kind of doing more or less an assembly line, factory schooling. So textbooks do come in handy in those instances. But I think that most of us know that they aren't easy to retain from, and they certainly aren't easy to pay attention to. So if you have a child who learns in a way other than textbooks, by all means, embrace it. If they enjoy reading living books, library books, biographies, let them learn from them. If they like doing hands-on experiments, or if they like exploring out in the world, let them learn that way. If they like writing, if they like jotting things down in a notebook. We were watching Spiderwick Chronicles again last night, and I was telling my kids, do you see Arthur Spiderwick's notebook? That is the perfect interest-led notebook. And there are some kids who really do like to do things like that. Just because your kids don't want to be sitting at a table or a desk working in textbooks all day doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them, because chances are those kids in school don't want to be sitting and working in those textbooks either. So another way that you can sabotage your homeschool is by insisting on having 6-hour days. And this kind of goes back to looking to school. Just because school takes 6 to sometimes 8 hours a day does not mean that your homeschool has to. I also did another video on this one, and I'll try to link videos in the description box that are related to this. And I really do that with all of my videos. But I'm going to try to put the one related to the time that you spend on homeschooling in this description box, because I think it's really important to remember that kids who are in school have a lot of distractions throughout the day. They have roll call, they have bathroom breaks, they have behavioral disciplines that the teachers have to deal with because they have so many students. They have figuring out who's taking lunch, who is doing bag lunch. You have kids doing, well, not kids, but lots of kids, all of the kids in the school usually doing assemblies. There are just so many interruptions throughout the day that there was a really great breakdown of it in a post that I read years ago by a teacher, and she broke down the actual amount of time that kids spend actually learning in school. And if I'm not mistaken, it came out to like an hour a day. It was not much at all. So I want you to remember that homeschooling does not have to look anything at all like school. They are two completely different things. And just because your kids aren't sitting there doing structured lessons for 6 hours a day does not mean that they aren't learning. So another way that you can sabotage your homeschool is by comparing your homeschool to others. Don't compare your homeschool to others. Don't compare your teaching style to other homeschooling parents. Don't compare your children to the children of other families or neighbors or the students in the street, or like I mentioned earlier, even in your own family. Every family is unique. Every family does things in the way that works best for them. And just because one family is doing something that you yourself have not started to do with your children doesn't mean that your kids are missing out or that they are doing something wrong. Embrace your individuality and tailor your homeschool around your children and how you yourself like to do things, because that's important. If you tailor everything around your child's needs but forget about you, the parent, the one who has to implement these things, it can spell trouble, especially if you are trying to implement things that really aren't a good fit for you. So another way to sabotage your homeschool, this is the 7th way, by the way, is to design your child's education around a test. We have heard of schools teaching to the test all the time because, they have so many standardized tests throughout the year that they more or less feel like they have to, or they are going to lose funding to their schools. And so it's something that a lot of homeschoolers, we kind of talk about that. Oh, well, schools just teach to the test. But I find that very often homeschoolers will be doing the same thing. There are some states in which kids have to do standardized tests. So a lot of the things that their parents will be teaching to their kids, especially around that time of year, will be tailored specifically to that standardized test. Now, in the upper years, in the teen years, when kids are getting closer to taking their SATs, a lot of parents will start tailoring their child's education to taking those SATs. And while we might look at these standardized tests as being all important and the most important thing that they're going to go through in their education, what they're learning in preparation for these tests will have zero to little effect on their actual lives. Just remember that if you are giving your kids a well-rounded education, your kids will do well on tests. Okay, I don't want to say will, because there are kids who have test-taking anxiety. So if your kids are not anxious about tests, yes, they will do well, even without all of the test prep and all of the teaching to the test. Teach your kids what they are interested in. Teach the things that they need to know and the things that they need to know how to do in the real world in order to succeed. And that will show through on any test that they have to take. So the 8th way to sabotage your homeschool is to not ever let your kids have a say in what they're learning about. I know that there are some things that are important for kids to learn that they might not necessarily choose on their own. And I'm certainly not saying don't ever teach kids things that they are not specifically choosing. But if your kids have a passion that they would love to learn about in school, do it. Take them to the library, get a bunch of books out on it, and do a unit study on it. Or if they want to do a certain activity, maybe if they want to deviate from your normal homeschool routine and do something a little bit different, listen to them. Sometimes that's all that they need to keep them interested in what they're doing, to keep them excited. And that is where the retention comes in, when your kids are actually engaged in what they're doing. So the 9th way to sabotage your homeschool is to obsess over finishing every curriculum. And I know this is hard for type A parents. You feel like you positively have to finish every curriculum. You have to finish every workbook. You have to finish everything in your lesson plan. You have to check off all those boxes. And if you haven't, you have somehow done your kids a disservice. And that, again, is not the case. What you want to look for throughout the year with your kids is progress. If your kids are steadily progressing, that is a good thing. How many schools actually finish their curriculums? Not a whole lot of them. And I want you to remember, I've said this before and I'll say it again. The things that your kids are learning in everyday life by being out in the world with you or just by seeing how things work, those are the things that are going to stick with them more than any curriculum you might do with them anyway. And so the last way to sabotage your homeschool is to refuse to deviate from your school schedule. This is why I love having a routine in our homeschool and not a specific schedule. I've seen on Pinterest all of the cute schedules that tell you specifically when to do everything, to give you a sort of a framework for how to work your homeschool, especially if you're newer. And yeah, it all looks well and good when you see, 9 o'clock to 9:45 language arts, 9:45 to 10:30 math. And if you see all of these time slots, it can be comforting to parents who are new because yeah, they are thinking back to their school days. And again, you go back to what you know. It can also be comforting for those type A parents to know exactly what their kids are going to be doing when. But I'm going to tell you that your kids are going to learn so much more in a relaxed atmosphere if they know that they are not going to be rushed just because they are taking longer than what that allotted time slot tells them to. And on the other hand, if your kids get done early with something, don't ever feel like you need to give them busy work or something that's just going to fill that empty time slot until, for example, their math time comes up. When your kids are done doing an assignment, just let them be done and move on to the next thing. Don't be so stuck on your schedule that you refuse to be flexible. And the same thing goes with when things in life happen. Stuff does happen. Unexpected visitors come. Sometimes catastrophes happen. Sometimes great opportunities that you might not otherwise have will all of a sudden pop up that you didn't necessarily write into those time slots. Don't be afraid to push that schedule aside and embrace what life hands to you. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram because YouTube disabled my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.